right, so we're diving into the history of the modern Middle East, huh?
Yeah, it's going to be a fascinating journey for sure.
We've got a ton of material here. Historical accounts,
Right.
personal stories. We're even getting into like the nitty-gritty of economics and the political structures. It's pretty amazing stuff.
It is. And to really understand the conflicts we see today, we got to go back to the roots. The fall of the Ottoman Empire.
Okay, so the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah.
This wasn't just like some small kingdom. I mean, this was a massive empire. It spanned like 3 continents.
Huge.
Lasted for over 600 years. When something that big collapses, it's going to leave a mark.
Oh, absolutely. It wasn't even just about the territory. It's like you suddenly have this power vacuum.
Yeah.
And everybody wants to fill it. We're talking groups within the region. But then also all the global powers, they were all kind of like, oh, here's our chance to reshape the Middle East.
Yeah.
To make it work for us,
It's almost like a game of chess or something.
Well,
but with incredibly high stakes.
Yeah.
One thing that really surprised me when I was going through all this research, did you know that Britain actually took control of Ottoman warships?
Oh, yeah.
Before World War I even started.
Bold move.
They literally seized these ships. They were being built in British shipyards. And the thing is, this whole operation was led by, get this, a young Winston Churchill.
Yeah.
He was already suspicious. He didn't trust the Turks to stay neutral in the war.
That's really interesting because it shows you that even before the war officially begins, right? You can see all these power plays starting to happen.
Yeah.
Everyone's jockeying for position, right? And Britain saw the Ottoman Empire as this weak point. And they were ready to take advantage.
And then bam, World War I explodes onto the scene.
Yeah.
But it's not just happening over there in Europe.
Right.
It completely reshapes the Middle East.
For sure.
The Ottoman Empire, they joined the Central Powers. And suddenly you've got battles raging all over the place. Gallipoli, the Caucasus, Mesopotamia, yeah. Even North Africa.
Right.
It's
in each of those locations, right. Super strategically important. We're talking control of trade routes, access to oil, pushing back against British influence. So, the fighting was incredibly intense.
Yeah, and in the middle of all this chaos, you have the Armenian genocide. It's just a horrific it's just a horrific reminder of how brutal war can be.
Absolutely. It's a tragic chapter. You just can't overlook it.
Well,
when you're looking at the history of the region, the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, it also sparked this wave of nationalism.
Oh, right.
Both Arab and Turkish. You have all these different groups, and they're all trying to grab power, trying to control what's left of the empire. And it's made even more complicated because, the European powers, they were making all these promises during the war. Often the promises kind of contradicted each other.
You mean how Britain was promising, on the one hand, Arab independence?
Right.
Like in the Hussein McMahon correspondence. But then on the other hand, they're promising a Jewish homeland in Palestine.
Exactly, with the Balfour Declaration.
Yeah. Talk about playing both sides.
It really was. And those promises, those weren't just diplomatic oopsies,
Right.
These were fundamental contradictions that created problems for decades to come. I mean, they basically laid the groundwork for the whole Arab-Israeli conflict, which is still casting a huge shadow over the region.
So the Ottoman Empire collapses.
Right.
And from the ashes, you have all these new states being created.
Yeah.
Under this system, they called them mandates.
Right.
Which basically meant that the European powers, especially France and Britain, they got to call the shots in these former Ottoman territories.
It's true. It wasn't just, drawing lines on a map. The whole mandate system, it really pissed off a lot of the local people.
Understandably.
They saw it as colonialism never really ended. And that was really important. I mean, that feeling led to the whole rise of anti-colonial movements, all these people pushing for independence. And that, of course, shaped the Middle East we know today.
And you can really see how those mandates shaped the region. Take Lebanon and Syria. Right?
Yeah.
They were created under the French mandate, and they've got all these complex sectarian divisions.
Right. And that's not a coincidence. That was part of the French strategy. Divide and rule.
Right. Or look at the Hashemite monarchy in Iraq.
Yeah.
Installed by the British. And, they've struggled with instability pretty much from the beginning.
It's...
And these decisions, they weren't just random. This was deliberate. An attempt to control the region, control its resources. And the consequences, well, we're still dealing with them today, right?
Yeah.
They shaped the whole political landscape of the Middle East. Yeah. It's amazing to see how these structures, imposed from outside, really shape things.
Hmm.
But even within all that, you still had these incredibly strong leaders emerge, each with their own vision for the region.
Mm.
And, I mean, you can't talk about this period without talking about Gamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt.
Right.
He became like the face of Arab nationalism,
Yeah.
challenging the West, head on.
Oh, yeah. When he stood up to the West during the Suez Crisis,
Yeah,
that really resonated with people all over the Arab world.
totally.
It's like, wow, there's this new kind of leadership, one that says no to colonial control and, embraces Arab unity, Arab strength. His actions totally had a ripple effect across the region.
It's interesting, though, because at the same time that Nasser is pushing this secular nationalist vision,
Yeah.
you have another powerful figure emerge with a totally different ideology,
Right.
Sayyid Qutb,
Yeah.
this really influential Islamist thinker.
Mm.
And his writings, they're like the opposite of Nasser's approach.
Yeah, Qutb was super critical, not just of the Western powers.
Right. But also of these secular Arab regimes. He thought they'd strayed from true Islam. Like they'd lost their way. He wanted a society based on Islamic principles, like a return to this, golden age of Islamic civilization.
So you have this, clash developing, nationalism versus Islamism.
Yeah.
Two really powerful competing ideologies with very different visions for the future of the Middle East.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that clash, it's still going on today. I mean, it's one of the defining features of the region's political landscape.
Yeah.
And, it's all tied up with the conflicts we see happening now, because when the Ottoman Empire collapsed, it left behind this whole mess of unresolved issues. And those issues, they just keep fueling instability. Like, look at the Arab-Israeli conflict.
Right. You can't talk about the Middle East without talking about that.
Nope.
All the conflicting promises during the Mandate period.
Right.
The displacement of the Palestinians when Israel was created in 48.
Uh-huh.
All the wars that followed. The occupation. It's like this tragic cycle of violence that never seems to end. Yeah, it's a conflict with these deep historical roots, competing claims to land, religious tensions, political tensions, just this total lack of trust between the two sides. And, there have been so many attempts at peace negotiations, but the core issues, they just never seem to get resolved. Like, what's the status of Jerusalem? What about the right of return for Palestinian refugees? How do you guarantee security for both Israelis and Palestinians? It's really tough.
It's heartbreaking, really. And it's not just the Arab-Israeli conflict, right? You have all these other struggles playing out, the fight for resources, the rise of new powers like Iran, the legacy of foreign intervention.
It's like all these aftershocks from an earthquake,
Yeah.
Still shaking things up decades later.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember, the Middle East isn't some monolithic thing.
Right.
It's a region full of diverse countries, each with their own unique history, their own internal dynamics, and their own competing interests.
Right.
And all those factors play into the conflicts we see today.
And then, of course, you have the Cold War thrown into the mix.
Oh, yeah.
The U.S. and the Soviet Union both trying to exert their influence, supporting different groups, sometimes even directly getting involved in the conflicts. It's like...
throwing gasoline on a fire.
Exactly.
That Cold War rivalry, it made existing tensions worse, created new divisions. Countries were forced to choose sides,
Right.
align themselves with one superpower or the other. And that just pulled them deeper into these global power struggles.
And we can't talk about the Middle East without talking about oil.
Right.
This liquid gold that totally transformed the region's economy. But it's also been a source of so much conflict.
Yeah, oil has had this massive impact on the Middle East. I mean, it brought incredible wealth to some countries, but it's also created huge economic disparities, fueled corruption, and it made the region even more important for the global powers, strategically speaking. And then, of course, you have the creation of OPEC,
Right.
which gave oil-producing nations this powerful voice on the world stage.
And OPEC's influence, I mean, it goes way beyond just economics, right?
Yeah.
Think about the 1973 oil embargo.
Right.
It showed the world that these countries, they could use their control of oil to influence global events, to challenge Western dominance.
Absolutely. That embargo, it was a real turning point. It showed how interconnected the global economy was. And it showed the power that oil-producing nations had. It also made the West think, hey, maybe we should find other sources of energy.
Yeah.
Reduce our reliance on Middle Eastern oil. And speaking of challenging Western dominance, the rise of Islamism has been another huge development.
Right.
It's kind of a continuation of what we were talking about with Quafill, right?
Yeah.
And his critique of both the West and these secular Arab regimes.
And Quefalad's ideas, they really resonated with a lot of people.
They did.
People who were disillusioned by the promises of, secular nationalism, by Western-style modernization. Islamism offered something different, a path based on Islamic principles, a rejection of what they saw as Western cultural and political dominance. And this rise of Islamism is played out in so many different ways, from political movements to social activism and, unfortunately, to violent extremism.
Yeah. It's really important to remember that Islamism isn't just one thing.
Right.
It's a whole spectrum of ideas and interpretations. Some movements want democratic reforms, social justice, but within an Islamic framework. While others, they promote these more radical, even violent approaches to get what they want.
And as we move into the late 20th century, early 21st century, the Middle East is still a flashpoint for conflict.
Yeah.
With all these new challenges emerging. But they're all intertwined with the historical stuff we've been talking about.
Absolutely. I mean, look at the Iraq War, the devastating consequences of that, the rise of ISIS, the Syrian civil war. It just,
It feels like it never ends.
It's true. These conflicts are incredibly complex. And, you can't understand them without understanding the history. It's not just about what's happening right now. It's about the legacies of empire, the struggle for power, for resources, the clash of ideologies, and this constant theme of foreign intervention.
It feels like, we've just scratched the surface here.
Yeah.
The modern Middle East, it's just so complex. It's like this tapestry.
Yeah.
Woven with all these threads of history, political maneuvering, the human desire for, self-determination.
Right. And it's a region that's so often misunderstood. People just see the headlines about conflict and instability.
Yeah.
But as we've seen, it's way more nuanced than that. Understanding the history, all those layers of history, that's key to understanding what's happening today.
It's amazing how decisions made like a century ago.
I know.
During the fall of the Ottoman Empire, right?
Right.
They're still shaping things today.
Yes.
It's like, whether it's the after effects of the mandate system, the Arab-Israeli conflict, or just, the clash between all these different visions for the future. Yeah. It's like the past never really goes away.
That's so true. It's a reminder that history doesn't just inform the present.
Right.
It actively shapes it.
Yeah.
These power plays, those broken promises from the early 20th century, it's not just stuff in a textbook. Those are forces that are still influencing political movements, social change, even armed conflicts.
We're talking about figures like Nasser and Quetta.
Right.
Each with their own, distinct ideology.
Totally.
And how they left their mark on the region. It makes you wonder, though, who are the figures driving change now?
Right.
What's their vision for the future of the Middle East?
That's the question we should always be asking, I think, because the Middle East, it's not static. It's always changing. New leaders emerge, new movements gain traction, the challenges shift. It's a good reminder that, to really engage with the Middle East, it takes more than just, reading the headlines.
Right.
It takes a deeper understanding of the historical currents that are always flowing beneath the surface.
I think this deep dive has been really insightful.
Yeah.
We've gone from the collapse of an empire to the birth of new nations.
Right.
From struggles for independence to the clash of ideologies. And I mean, it's clear that the modern Middle East is a product of all of that.
Yeah.
All these interconnected events and decisions.
I think that's a great point. It shows how important it is to understand those connections.
Yeah.
To move past those simplistic narratives,
Right.
and to engage with the region's history in a way that encourages empathy, critical thinking, a more nuanced understanding of, all the complexities we see unfolding today.
It's a call to action, too.
For sure.
Understanding the past is the first step towards figuring out the present and hopefully shaping a better future for the Middle East.
Couldn't agree more.
There's just so much more to learn, so much more to uncover. And I think this deep dive, it's given us a good place to start. Thanks for joining us on this journey through history. And I hope you'll keep exploring this amazing, ever-changing region.